Louis XVI inherited the most powerful kingdom in Europe, the richest palace in the world, unlimited authority, 28 million subjects, and almost no experience with consequences. History remembers him as weak, indecisive, out of touch, the king who lost his crown and eventually his head. But what if Louis XVI wasn't the cause of the disaster? What if he was the result? Because long before the French Revolution destroyed the monarchy, something else had already happened. 3 generations of luxury had quietly removed the one thing every leader needs: the experience of making a decision and living with what it costs. Psychologists have a name for what happens when comfort becomes permanent, when feedback disappears, when reality becomes filtered, when consequences stop arriving. We call it atrophy. History calls it Louis XVI. And by the end of this story, the question won't be why France collapsed. The question will be, what has comfort quietly taken from you? Because the most dangerous prison in history wasn't built from iron, it was built from gold. Before Versailles became a palace, it was a project. And before it became a symbol of luxury, it was a weapon. Louis XIV understood this because he built it. The story begins 20 years before Versailles became the center of French power. When Louis XIV was a child, France descended into a series of civil conflicts known as the Fronde. Nobles rebelled, cities revolted, the monarchy nearly collapsed, and the young king learned a lesson he would never forget. Power is never as secure as it appears. The nobles of France still possessed wealth, influence, private networks, regional loyalties. If left alone, they could become dangerous. So Louis XIV designed a solution unlike anything Europe had ever seen. He built Versailles, not simply as a residence, but as a machine. A machine designed to pull every ambitious noble in France into a single environment where their attention could be controlled. At Versailles, status depended on proximity to the king. Power flowed through access. Influence became theater. The most powerful aristocrats in Europe spent their days competing for ceremonial privileges. Who could hand the king his gloves? Who could accompany him to dinner? Who could stand closest during a public appearance? The system worked brilliantly because Louis XIV understood exactly what it was: a tool, a construction, a deliberate solution to a specific problem. Every hallway, every ritual, every ceremony, every rule existed for a reason, and because he built the machine, he could see the machine. But every successful system creates a danger that appears only when the people who built it disappear, because eventually, the architect dies and the heirs arrive. This is where the luxury trap begins. The first generation builds the system. The second generation inherits it. The third generation forgets why it exists. And the fourth generation mistakes it for reality. Louis XVI never experienced the instability that created Versailles, never witnessed noble rebellion, never watched the monarchy nearly collapse. He was born into a world where Versailles simply existed. The rituals existed. The hierarchy existed. The power existed. The luxury existed. To Louis XIV, Versailles was a solution. To Louis XVI, it was normal. And that difference changes everything. Because the builder understands the machine. The heir mistakes the machine for reality. Psychologists see this pattern everywhere: family wealth, political dynasties, corporations, institutions, even belief systems. The people who build them understand the trade-offs, sacrifices, and risks that made them possible. The people who inherit them receive the outcome without experiencing the process. And eventually something dangerous happens. The outcome begins to look inevitable, permanent, natural. The heir forgets that what feels permanent was once fragile, that what feels normal was once fought for. that what feels guaranteed was once uncertain. Louis XVI inherited the most sophisticated political machine in Europe, but he inherited it the way a child inherits electricity. He knew it existed. He benefited from it. He depended on it. But he never truly understood how it worked. And when a person cannot see the system supporting them, they cannot see when that system begins to fail. The French Revolution did not begin with Louis XVI. It began the moment Versailles stopped being understood as a tool and started being experienced as reality, because reality can be questioned. Tools can be repaired. But the things we mistake for reality become invisible, and invisible weaknesses are always the most dangerous ones. Inside the largest palace in Europe, Louis XVI disappeared, not into the throne room, not into the council chamber, into a workshop, a room filled with tools, metal, locks, clocks, mechanisms, objects that obeyed rules, objects that made sense. For centuries, historians treated this as an eccentric detail, a strange hobby, an odd footnote in the life of a doomed king. They were looking at it backwards. The workshop was not the curiosity. Versailles was. Imagine inheriting responsibility for 28 million people, a kingdom drowning in debt, a government tangled in bureaucracy, a court filled with competing interests, every decision carrying consequences you cannot fully predict, every solution creating new problems, every voice insisting it has the answer. Now imagine living inside that pressure every day. What does the human brain do? Something surprisingly predictable. It searches for a territory where effort and outcome still connect. Psychologists call these experiences high-agency environments, places where actions produce visible results, where feedback is immediate, where cause and effect remain intact. The workshop gave Louis something Versailles never could: reality. The metal either fit or it didn't. The mechanism worked or it failed. The lock opened or it remained shut. No court politics, no hidden agendas, no competing factions, no endless uncertainty, just reality, immediate, honest, unfiltered. And this is where the tragedy begins, because the skills that make someone effective in a workshop are not the skills that make someone effective in a kingdom. A lock can be understood completely. A country cannot. A mechanism follows rules. People don't. The workshop rewarded precision. Leadership requires judgment. The workshop rewarded control. Reality rarely offers it. Louis found competence in a room too small to save him. And perhaps that is why he loved it. Not because he enjoyed metal, because the workshop was the only place left where his decisions mattered. Think about that. The most powerful man in Europe, searching for a corner of his own life where he could still feel effective. Not powerful, effective. There is a difference. Most people watching this have their own workshop. Not a room, a habit, an activity. A small territory where competence survives. The inbox that reaches zero. The spreadsheet that balances. The workout completed. The hobby mastered. The project perfectly organized. Tiny islands of certainty surrounded by larger systems that feel impossible to control. There is nothing wrong with that. The human brain needs evidence that its actions matter. The danger begins when the workshop becomes a refuge instead of preparation. When the small win replaces engagement with the larger problem. When competence becomes something practiced in miniature because reality feels too large to confront directly. Louis XVI did not retreat into the workshop because he lacked intelligence. He retreated because the workshop gave him something Versailles no longer could: feedback. And without realizing it, he began spending more time governing metal than governing France. The locks improved. The kingdom didn't. And that distinction would become fatal. Because while Louis was learning how mechanisms worked, Outside the palace walls, another mechanism was already beginning to move, one far larger than any lock he would ever build, a mechanism called revolution. And the most dangerous part? He could not hear it. Not because it was quiet, because Versailles had spent generations teaching its kings which sounds mattered and which could safely be ignored. The crowd is moving. Thousands of people flood the streets. Tension has been building for months. Bread prices have exploded. The government is collapsing under debt. Rumors spread faster than facts. And now the people of Paris are marching toward a fortress called the Bastille. By nightfall, the prison will fall. The governor will be dead. The French Revolution will have begun. History is moving. The world is changing. An entire political order is starting to collapse. 300 kilometers away, Louis XVI is hunting. The gardens are immaculate. The servants are efficient. The rituals continue. Nothing appears unusual. Nothing feels urgent. Nothing suggests that the world outside the palace gates is beginning to burn. And that evening, Louis XVI sits down with his diary, a habit he had maintained for years, a simple record of the day, a few words, sometimes only one. He opens the page for July 14th, 1789, and writes, Rien, nothing. Nothing. Not because nothing happened, because he had not killed any deer during the hunt. To Louis XVI, that made it a day of nothing, one of the most important days in modern history. And in the king's private reality, nothing happened. For generations, historians have treated this entry as evidence of incompetence, proof that Louis was disconnected, detached, clueless. But psychology suggests something more unsettling. What if this diary entry wasn't a personal failure? What if it was evidence that the system was working exactly as designed? Think about the people surrounding the king: courtiers, advisors, ministers, servants, nobles. Every person in Versailles depended on the stability of the monarchy. Every person benefited when the king felt secure, comfortable, confident. And because of that, everyone around him had an incentive to soften reality. Not necessarily to lie, just to filter, to delay, to reframe, to present information in its least threatening form. One person removes a detail, another removes a warning, a third delays bad news until tomorrow. Nobody intends deception, but collectively, reality begins arriving distorted. Psychologists call this an information bubble, an echo chamber, a closed feedback system. The people inside it are not separated from reality by walls. They are separated by incentives. And that distinction matters. Because the most effective echo chambers are not built by censorship. They are built by comfort. Imagine living in a world where nearly every interaction confirms your assumptions, where criticism rarely reaches you, where disagreement carries social risk, where everyone around you benefits from your comfort. How long would it take before your perception of reality began to drift? A year? 5 years? A generation? Versailles had 3. And this is the true meaning of the luxury trap. The trap is not luxury itself. The trap is what luxury removes: friction, urgency, feedback, reality, the information that forces adaptation, the discomfort that forces growth, the consequences that force learning. Louis XVI did not know France because France rarely reached him. The kingdom arrived filtered, refined, polished, presented in forms that demanded as little action as possible. And while the palace became more comfortable, the king became less prepared. That is why the diary entry matters. Not because Louis wrote nothing, because he believed it. He genuinely believed that nothing important had happened, which means the most dangerous prison in history was not built from stone. It was built from information, from comfort, from protection, from 1,000 small acts of filtering reality until reality itself became difficult to see. And the most tragic part? The prisoner never once tried to escape, because it never felt like a prison. It felt like home. By the time reality finally broke through the walls of Versailles, it wasn't arriving as information anymore. It was arriving as a revolution. Most people believe Louis XVI lost power when the French Revolution began. History suggests something different. By the time the revolution arrived, the damage had already been done. The revolution did not create the weakness. It exposed it. Because revolutions are like stress tests. They reveal what was already there. A bridge does not fail because a storm arrives. The storm reveals weaknesses that existed long before the rain. The same is true of people. The same is true of empires. The same is true of kings. By the late 18th century, France had serious problems. Debt, food shortages, political unrest, an outdated tax system, a growing crisis of legitimacy. None of these problems were impossible to solve. Other governments had faced similar challenges. The question was whether the monarchy still possessed the psychological capacity to respond. And that is where the luxury trap finally becomes visible. Because Louis XVI had inherited authority, but he had not inherited the experiences that teach someone how to use it. Psychologists know something important about judgment. Judgment is not knowledge. It is not intelligence. It is not information. Judgment is a skill, and like every skill, it develops through feedback, through mistakes, through consequences, through friction, through reality pushing back. A person learns judgment the same way a pilot learns to fly, not by reading about turbulence, by flying through it. But what happens when a person spends their entire life protected from consequences? What happens when failure is softened? When mistakes are absorbed by the system? When discomfort is removed before it can teach anything? The answer is surprisingly simple. The skill never develops, not because the person lacks potential, because the environment never demands it. This is the hidden cost of excessive comfort. Comfort feels like protection. But beyond a certain point, protection becomes deprivation. You stop losing opportunities to suffer. You start losing opportunities to learn. Louis XVI was intelligent, educated, conscientious, by many accounts decent. But history does not reward potential. History rewards adaptation, and adaptation requires friction. This is why the founder and the heir are never the same person. The founder is shaped by scarcity. The heir is shaped by abundance. The founder learns through struggle. The heir inherits the result of the struggle. The founder develops judgment because reality forces it. The heir receives comfort because the founder succeeded. And every generation faces the same temptation, to confuse comfort with preparation. Louis XVI inherited the outcome of greatness, but not the process that created it. He inherited power, without developing the instincts required to hold it. He inherited Versailles, without understanding why it existed. He inherited authority, without ever truly experiencing resistance. And when reality finally arrived in full force, he encountered it the way a sheltered person encounters a storm, not with adaptation, with shock. The luxury trap is not wealth. It is not privilege. It is not success. The luxury trap begins the moment comfort starts removing the experiences that create competence. The moment protection starts replacing preparation. The moment convenience starts replacing feedback. The moment a person becomes insulated from the very realities they will eventually be forced to face. And by the time they realize what has been taken from them, they usually need it most. Louis XVI did not fail because he lacked power. He failed because the system that gave him power had quietly removed the ability to use it. And the tragedy is that he never knew it was happening. Not until the walls of Versailles stopped protecting him, and reality finally walked through the gates. Louis XVI was not born weak. He was born comfortable, and those are not the same thing. Weakness can be overcome. Comfort is harder. Because weakness announces itself, comfort disguises itself as success. That is the final lesson of the luxury trap. The things that destroy us rarely arrive looking dangerous. They arrive looking helpful, convenient, protective, comfortable. They remove friction, reduce stress, eliminate uncertainty. And for a while, they improve life. Until one day you discover they have removed something else. Something invisible. Something you needed. Louis XVI never noticed the trade. How could he? Nobody does. The palace removed discomfort. But it also removed feedback. It removed consequences. It removed reality. And because those losses happened slowly, they never felt like losses. They felt like normal life. That is how the luxury trap works. It does not take your abilities away. It simply gives you fewer opportunities to use them, until eventually, the ability begins to disappear on its own. And this is why the story matters, because almost nobody watching this lives in a palace. But every one of us lives inside a system, a routine, an environment, an identity, an information network. A collection of assumptions so familiar that they feel like reality itself. The question is whether they are preparing you or protecting you. Think about the information you consume. Who challenges it? Think about the people around you. Who tells you things you don't want to hear? Think about the skills you rely on. Which ones are still being tested by reality? And which ones survive only because your environment no longer demands them? Most people imagine the greatest danger in life is failure. History suggests something else. The greater danger may be success. Not because success is bad, because success creates the conditions where growth can quietly stop, where comfort becomes normal, where feedback becomes optional, where the distance between perception and reality grows so slowly that nobody notices it happening, not even the person at the center of it. Louis XVI inherited a kingdom. The kingdom inherited a king who had never been prepared to save it. And when reality finally arrived, it arrived all at once. Revolutions always do. Markets do. Organizations do. Relationships do. Health crises do. Life does. Reality is patient. But it always collects its debt. The French Revolution did not begin when the Bastille fell. It did not begin when the crowds gathered. It did not begin when the king was arrested. It began generations earlier, the moment comfort started replacing preparation, the moment inheritance started replacing understanding, the moment the palace became more important than the purpose it was built to serve. And that brings us to the question Louis XVI never asked, the question every generation eventually faces. What have you inherited that you have never questioned? What comforts have become so normal that they now feel like reality? What workshop are you retreating into while something larger demands your attention? And if the world changed tomorrow, which of your strengths would survive outside the palace? Because the most dangerous prison in history was never Versailles. It was the belief that Versailles was reality. Power shapes history. Human nature repeats it. Subscribe, because we are just getting started.